This is still chapter 4, verse 23. Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in the synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom. Remember, he's living in a country that's been overrun by the Romans, by a military invasion. Before that, it was the Greeks. Then after the Greeks, it was the Romans. And yet he's preaching a totally different kingdom. I mean, they're used to kingdoms. They're used to leaders. They're used to being ruled by the Greeks. Israel's been in bondage for most of its years because before that, was all the others. But the significant thing to me is this. He's gone around preaching now in verse 23, preaching the kingdom and healing all manner of sickness. And by chapter 5, which is just a few verses later, he saw the multitudes, he went up the mountain and began to teach. Now, what happens here in Matthew is Jesus is on that mountain a long time because he's preaching chapter 5, which I'm not going to deal with, chapter 6, chapter 7, and it's not until chapter 8 in Matthew that he comes down from the mountain. And in verse 1, it's simply when he was coming down from the mountain, great multitudes followed him. And then what you've got is a whole series of miracles. And chapters 8 and chapter 9 are full. In fact, it's still in chapter 8. I'm intrigued. In chapter 8, he's just come down from the mountain and he's healing the sick and casting out the demons. And also, you've got the miracle of the ship, because in verse 23, Jesus entered into the ship, the storm arose, and Jesus calmed the storm. So what we're seeing is this. This is exactly what John was saying. John never saw this kind of miracle. And John is forecasting that Jesus would be more powerful than John. And here it is. And so, having all these, then you come to chapter 9. And Jesus then came actually into his own city. And they brought, at this time, I'm not quite sure, that's probably is Capernaum, not Nazareth. I'm not sure. But that's not the issue. The real issue is this, that he was in a house to minister, and you know the story. They brought a man who's paralyzed, lying in a bed, and Jesus, seeing their face, said to the sick, "Son, be of good cheer, your sin is forgiven." Right. And immediately by verse 3, certain of the scribes said to themselves, "This man is blaspheming." Why? Blaspheming because he's saying he's forgiven sin. And they're later going to say this. Who can forgive sin? Only God can forgive sin. And so Jesus knew this religious argument. Remember that these are religious people. There's certain of the scribes and the Pharisees, and they are the religious leaders. And they then challenge Jesus because he said to the sick man, "Your sin is forgiven." And in verse 4, Jesus knew their thoughts, and he said, "Why do you think evil?" Verse 5, which is the easiest, to say to this man, "Your sin is forgiven," or to say, "Rise up and walk"? Now, this is a tremendous question. Which is the easiest? Very often, I like to ask people, what do you think? Which is the easiest? Is it easier to forgive sin or to heal this paralyzed man? And the answer is very simple. Only God can forgive sin, and only God can heal this man. So Jesus was laying down a principle, but in verse 6, he emphasizes it because he says, "So that you may know that the Son of Man, that I am the Son of Man, and that I have power on earth to forgive sin, he said to the paralyzed man, get up and go home. And he got up and went home. And in verse 8, the multitudes marveled and glorified God, which had given such power unto man. Now, I find so significant because the emphasis with Jesus from John prophesied Jesus would have more power, emphasized the power. Now, you've seen what happened in Matthew. Now here, quite clearly, Jesus is demonstrating this by saying that you may know that I have power on earth. So what he's really saying is, as the Son of God, you think God has power in heaven. I am God on earth. I am the Son of God, the Son of Man, the Son of God on earth, and I have power. And that power was demonstrated not by the forgiveness of sin. It was demonstrated by raising the crippled man. But he needed that miracle to justify his power to forgive sin. So in the healing miracle, it is a demonstration who Jesus is. And right now, at the beginning of his ministry, he's demonstrating, I have power to forgive sin. Do you get it? He's demonstrating it through the paralyzed man. And that's what it says in verse 6, so that you can know that I have power on earth to forgive sin. He said, paralyzed men get up and walk. And when the people saw it, they glorified God. And to me, I find it's very significant because at this stage, not all the disciples have been chosen, but here in verse 9, it seems as if it's virtually the last one. It's Matthew. He was a tax gatherer. And in verse 9, Matthew follows Jesus. But I'm quite intrigued at what's happening with the miracles, because by verse 10, by chapter 10, what's happening? By chapter 10, he's calling the 12, and I'm always intrigued because that 12 included Judas, who would finally betray him. And he sends them out, gave them the power. Chapter 10, verse 1, he called the 12 disciples, gave them power. You know, the thing that people don't understand about Christianity, about the church and about God is power. The whole message of the gospel, the whole message of the New Testament is not prophecy, it's power. The message of the Old Testament is prophecy. The message of the New Testament is power. And he gave them power. Now, they haven't received the Holy Spirit yet. But he still says he gave them power. So can you understand? It's tracing back to John the Baptist. John the Baptist prophesies, Jesus is coming, he will have more power than me. Then when we see the demonstration of power in chapter 9, he's using that power, healing the crippled man, to forgive sin. So what you're seeing is already in the beginning of the ministry of Jesus, this very strong thing appearing, that Jesus has power to forgive sin and he has power to heal the sick. And now he's commissioning the disciples.